This video is sponsored by Terrell Hutton, who makes the invisible investable. Today on the CEO Barbecue, we're looking for gold as well as some base metals in northwestern Ontario, together with storm exploration. For a bullet point summary of this and all other CEO interviews, please go to resourcetalks.com and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. The company you're about to hear from has paid us for the production of this interview, but this interview is still intended only for experienced speculators because this is venture capital and mining is a very risky industry where failure is the norm. All conversations are general and impersonal in nature, and they contain forward-looking statements. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and my business sells content-producing services, which also makes me biased. So before continuing on, please talk to an independent investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and also visit setterplus.ca where you'll find the company's official filings. If you're not 100% sure you understand all the biases and the disclaimers that I just showed you, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said herein. That all said, Storm Exploration is an early stage exploration company that has 3 district scale properties in that same province of Ontario. Again, early stage, so no research on them yet, but big plans for exploration this year, and specifically big for a company of this size because, well, typically financing risk is usually one of the biggest challenges at this stage. But Storm's currently in a decent financial position as they just completed the sale of their previously flagship asset called Miminisca for a total consideration of $5.8 million, which of course we'll talk about later on in the conversation. We're also going to do a deeper dive on the assets later on as well, but the project getting the most attention in the near term now is called Gold Standard, which is north of Fort Frances. Again, that's northwestern Ontario. It is an early stage exploration asset though, so there's a couple of theses there that Storm's going to be working on. One of it is a base metals thesis, which is supported by a 5-kilometer conductivity anomaly identified by an airborne EM, as well as 4 historic drill holes from the 70s, I believe, that were drilled by Inco, and they intercepted copper and zinc mineralization in 3 of those 4 holes. But unfortunately, as far as I understand it, the assays for those holes are not available right now. That's the base metals thesis. But there's also the thesis that, well, as one might expect, there might be some gold at a project carrying the name Gold Standard, and hopefully there is. That thesis there is supported by grab samples that had up to 166 grams per ton gold, though, again, that's not in core. It is in grab samples, so inherently biased. But there's also some historic workings, some small-scale gold mining, if you will, that operated there in the early 1900s. So naturally, this project will be the focus of the conversation today, but there's also the Keezhik project as well as the Attwood project, with the former having some historic drill intercepts on it going as high as 19 grams, though those are narrow. They're just about a meter and a half. And of course, that's historic, so not currently confirmed. But then later on, there's Attwood as well. It's a big property, but it hasn't been looked at since the 70s as well, 1972 to be specific. So this is the earliest stage asset that Storm has, which might see some geophysics this year, as far as I understand it, and that's going to be in the form of an airborne electromagnetic survey, similar to the one I told you about at Gold Standard. But as far as I understand it, no drilling on this one yet. So again, 3 projects, Gold Standard, going to be drilled this year. That's the most advanced one. Keezhik might see some drilling as well. There's some historic hits on it. And then Attwood, early stage, expecting geophysics, all of which raises a lot of questions, which I can hopefully ask later on in the conversation. Now, for some of the numbers here and more details, Storm is listed as Storm, really, just no O. I guess they don't like vowels here, but it's STRM on the TSXV, where the average 3-month volume is just about 57,000 units. The stock's 52-week high is 36 cents, and its 52-week low is 12 cents. With just a little under 21 million shares outstanding and a $5 million market cap, today this is a 24-cent stock with a 50 and a 200-day moving average at respectively 22.4 and 24 cents. There are 3.4 million warrants outstanding. They're exercisable at 38 cents, and they represent about 13.5% of the fully diluted shares. And there are 1.1 million options representing about 4% of the 25.2 million fully diluted shares. About a fifth of the company, or 21% to be specific, is held in the hands of insiders and management. Landor, which is a name that will mean more to you if you keep listening later on, they own about 10% of the company. About a third of the company, so 35% to be specific, is estimated to be owned by high net worth individuals, leaving about a third or 34% in the hands of assumed retail. Again, they just did a deal giving them total liquidity of almost $6 million. But what does that look like right now? And how far will that money get them? When's the next financing coming? What are the assays coming? How much will running this company cost them now moving forward versus the amount going into the ground, and stuff like that are, of course, going to be part of the questions later on in the conversation. Now, for this to become a conversation, though, I will have to shut up already. And Bruce, I'll give you the word. But first of all, thank you for sitting down with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been a while since you and I have spoken, so it is a pleasure to talk to you again. And I am looking forward to going over the basics here in a minute. But just before we get into it all, I realized that I haven't asked you kind of the most fundamental barbecue question, which is, how do you like your steak?
Medium.
That's it. That is the only right answer. Although you do live in Western Canada, sometimes I do get answers that I don't like there, which are anything above medium. I don't like. I don't think you're originally from Western Canada, though. Is that right?
No, I spent my formative years were in Eastern Canada. I was born in the United States to parents that were studying finishing their PhDs, and then we moved to Canada upon the completion of their PhDs, and I've lived here ever since. So that was in the late '60s.
Right. And but you mostly lived in Eastern Canada. You said, what was that?
That's right. I grew up in the town of Dundas, which is near Hamilton, Ontario. I think that's maybe 70 kilometers outside of Toronto. And I lived there until I finished high school, and then I moved west, first working on oil rigs in Alberta, and then eventually winding up in British Columbia and going to the University of British Columbia, where I graduated with a degree in geological engineering, specializing in geophysics.
Alberta. That's where the medium comes from. You wouldn't have survived if you were eating your steak any other way in Alberta. They only take it medium or lower, nothing above that.
That's correct.
Jokes aside, I am looking forward to better understanding where things are going now after, dare I say, the company's rebirth, maybe. And this might be, well, this might be a good point to set the stage before we go a little bit further more in your background. But do you think this deal was a one-off event, which you'll see you're basically going to use the money to keep exploration or to keep exploring off of here? Or do you see yourself becoming a bit of a prospect generator going forward? Again, 3 projects. Now you've done this kind of a deal. So what is kind of the strategy? What is the company being reborn into, if you will?
Well, so the part of exploration that I like is the early stage exploration. I want projects with enough meat on the bone to know that I'm in the right location, and then try to make that discovery. That's the goal. Look, I'm not opposed to doing sales or joint ventures like we've just done with Canadian Goldfields. It made sense, it made business sense to me to do that. But I'm also not afraid to explore a project, and take it the distance. So I think it really depends on the circumstances that you're faced with. Right now, I am fully focused on exploring the properties that we have. We're not looking to vend those properties. That said, if you're approached, you have to consider all opportunities.
Yeah. That's fair. And it is clear, and I understand what you're doing. I think that's also what I would have expected, having spoken to you before. You're opening up a couple of interesting topics, which we'll definitely touch upon later on. And even though this isn't the first time you and I are speaking again, it is your first time on the barbecue since a very long time. So maybe as a bit of a refresher, we'll take a step back and go through what I call the smell test, which is aimed at understanding the incentives and track record of management. And I am going to start off with yourself and your track record. Talk to me about who you are and whether you've made more money for shareholders in your career than what you've spent so far.
Oh, that's a good question. So, track record, relatively shortly after finishing university with a degree in geological engineering, I wound up working for BHP on what would become Canada's first diamond mine. That was a Catty. So I arrived right after the first discovery of kimberlite. That's the rock that contains diamond. And I worked with that project right through all the feasibility, breaking the ground for the mine, and even worked as the mine geologist briefly. That was not something that I liked. I preferred the exploration side. So went to work for the junior that had a 29% stake in that mine and worked with that company until it was bought out. And then I did some consulting, but for the last Since 2004, so a little over 20 years, I've been either a director or CEO, member of management of publicly traded companies. Pretty early in your career, you make a decision whether or not you want to be technical and pursue a technical career, or if you want to go in the management stream. And I pretty quickly realized that I wanted to be in the management stream. So got my first opportunity to start a publicly traded company in 2004, and have been doing that either as a CEO or a director in some instances ever since.
I do want to know more about that, but people listening should also want to know more about Tara Hutton, who doesn't only make the invisible investable, but they've made this video free of YouTube ads by sponsoring it. Tara Hutton is built for the people who are tired of going through boring PowerPoint decks and geological jargon when they're analyzing mining companies. It's a digital platform where the data, the story, and the context sit together so mining investors can use visuals to understand the why without needing a geology degree or a week off work. And if you're on the company side, it's a great way to present your project like a serious operator with everything investors keep asking for in one place. Contact them at terrahutton.io. What kind of companies have you been involved with or ever since you started running them?
Yeah, so the first company was called Indicator Minerals, and it was diamonds because I had such a deep background in diamonds, and I spent most of my career looking for diamonds, which I like to describe as the riskiest end of a risky business. They're incredibly difficult to find. Found a lot of kimberlites in my career, and kimberlites are the rock that host diamond. But finding economic quantities of diamond in those kimberlites, that's really challenging. So that having been involved in the first discovery and watching the stock of the company that owned a 29% stake go from 25 cents to $60 in a period of about 18 months was, it lights the fire of wanting to explore and that passion, if you will. But it's not as easy as it seems. So a lot of discoveries certainly have made shareholders. In the game of mineral exploration, there's the ebb and flow of your share price. And as you make discovery, for instance, finding kimberlites, even though they may not have diamonds in the quantities that wind up being economic, can definitely drive the share price forward. So people make money. But ultimately, if you aren't successful in finding an economic deposit, somebody loses money. So that's a balance. You get both people who've made money investing with the companies that I've run, as well as people who've lost money investing in the companies I've run.
Yeah, that's fair. And seems like you got out of diamonds at the right time because they haven't really come back since, and it doesn't seem like they're going to make a comeback anytime soon.
No, I don't. I think that it's very difficult. It's a very challenging sector within the mineral exploration business, and so I'm much more comfortable in gold and base metals.
Do you currently do anything else? Do you have any other executive or board positions with other companies?
I'm helping out a company called Max Resource on a project they have in Colombia that's in conjunction with Freeport. So I do a little bit of consulting work there. I picked that up primarily because Storm has been very quiet for the last 3 years. As it navigated, dealing with First Nations and then also a very difficult market. So in the interim, I've been helping out Max with their project in Colombia and Freeport. But that's that's winding down as we go forward here, and Storm picks up its momentum.
You're not CEO of that company, as far as I understand it. No. So that's really where I was going at that.
Just a technical consultant.
So my idea was, or what I was thinking is like, how much of your time actually goes towards Storm? Seems like it's going to be just about 100%.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a big shareholder, so it's in my best interest to have my full focus. My full focus.
Yeah, and the other 100% goes toward your dog, who I haven't met still. I've only been hearing about him since I think 2 or 3 years now, and I haven't met him yet.
He's my buddy.
Yeah, we should bring him on camera one day too. Talk to me about the rest of the team that you have right now. Again, given the fact that you went through a calm period where not much happened for a couple of years, really, do you still have the right team that's made discoveries in similar settings before, similar discoveries, specific experience for the specific task at hand?
Absolutely. So the great benefit of having been in the business, excuse me, for 30 plus years is that I have a great network of consultants. So look, the company doesn't have any full-time employees. I'm not a full-time employee. Well, I work 100% of my time for the company, but I'm not an employee of the company. And I do that on purpose to keep it nice and lean so that when we go through tough times, you can keep the overhead very small. So, but I rely on a network of consultants and contractors to achieve the goals of the company. So I have no concerns over the expertise that's available in my network.
Hmm. But it's mostly consultants. Then what is the difference between working with consultants and kind of having your own team, and what are the trade-offs there for a company of your size?
Well, so I guess having a consultant, if you have a full-time employee, then they're, fully focused just on that. And a consultant will have other focuses, if you will. Although I choose to work with consultants that have only one or two clients so that you can get a lot of their focus. And because you want them to have ownership of whatever it is they're doing. If, for instance, somebody who is leading the exploration charge. But the beauty of not having a full-time employee is that you can, with very relatively short notice, if things go sideways in the market, and the market can change rapidly, as I'm sure you're very aware, that you can preserve your capital by sort of putting down tools, if you will, and not having to lay people off and go through a whole process, which is painful for both the employees as well as management. So if you run a lean company, particularly, and I think it's important, particularly for early stage explorers, because we're so vulnerable to the capital markets and the fluctuations of the sentiment, if you will, that you have to be able to respond rapidly to a changing condition. And if you need to lay people off, it's much easier just to call your consultant and say, look, we're going to be, spending a lot less money. We're going to do a lot less time. And they move on because they've got their shingle out and they know that that's the rule of the game. Law of the jungle.
Yeah. And the market can absolutely turn pretty quickly, which I'm very wary of right now. What about your board, Bruce? What's happening there? I know there have been some changes recently.
Yeah.
Landor coming in on board. What's going on there? What's the board looking like right now? What kind of expertise do you have?
It's a lot of technical expertise, and so, as well as business expertise. So Joe Price has a degree not only in geology, and she's a very accomplished geologist. She also has a degree in a master's degree in an MBA. So a lot of business savvy there. A lot of technical expertise on our board. There's no question. Every one of the members of the board has a technical degree of some kind. But both Joe as well as Alexander Shaw, who comes from the Landor side, have business degrees. So a lot of business savvy, capital markets experience. And I get that also from my consultants and advisors.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect to make any changes or strengthen the board any further, or is the board, yeah?
Yeah, I am looking at adding members to the board. Look, being a board member of a junior, particularly an early exploration junior, is it's it's not. It's something that you don't do lightly because there's liabilities involved, and there's really very, your upside is through the options and the network of people that you increase by having the association with the company. But there's a lot of liability and risk involved in being a director. So, it's not the easiest thing to find quality directors with a lot of experience doing what you do. So I'm always looking for right directors. It would be nice to have a little bit more, for instance, something with a little bit more capital markets experience and financial experience. We have a lot of that on the board already, but somebody specifically with those qualifications would be a great addition. So I'm always on the hunt, but I'm also careful to make sure that you're adding people who are going to be constructive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, fair. I also think about kind of the network that you're building around a company and where support is going to come from. I know John Williamson is an advisor to the board. If I'm
Yes.
from the Metals Group, is there a plan for you to become a Metals Group company, or are you going to stay independent? How do you see that?
No, I think we'll be continue to be independent. I'd say we're Metals Group adjacent. We have a lot of people, and I share some people mostly with the Metals Group, and certainly very friendly with that group, and take advice from John. John is a very accomplished geologist, but also a very, very accomplished investor and executive. So I take a lot of advice from John, and I'm quite privileged to be able to rely on that advice. But I don't see the company becoming a metals group company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair and clear. I appreciate that. I also want to talk about incentive, which I believe skin in the game is the largest one of them. 21% insider ownership, insider management ownership is what you call here. How much of that is you personally?
About 8.5%, I think.
Mm-hmm. How did
I'll have
you?
to check that. It's over 8% anyway.
What would the kind of the average cost be of those shares? Because I remember as you and I were talking over the last couple of years, there was a period where the company didn't have money, so you didn't take a cash salary, and then you ended up converting some of the debt that the company had to you. You converted
Correct.
that into shares. Where's that putting you in terms of average cost for your shares?
I've never done that calculation. It's not probably a number I want to know. I'm guessing it probably closer to 40 cents. But I'm honestly, I'm guessing. I have not done that calculation.
Really, what I'm checking for here is it half a penny? That's really what I'm checking for
Oh
here. Like,
no,
is there like
I'm like many of the shareholders of Storm. I'm underwater.
yeah? Is there any cheap paper within or what outside of management owns, like either with how the company got started initially, like maybe if there was a shell, the person who put the vehicle together or something like that, that's still kind of
No, there
lingering
was
on?
never any cheap paper. Even when this was, so we got the company going in 2018 or 20, like late 2017 is when we went public. There was never any cheap paper. We took over a shell that was got fair value when we did it, and when the private company that became initially Lithoquest Diamonds, which was the predecessor to Storm, there was never any cheap paper.
Mm-hmm. Good. Talk to me a little bit about the share structure today, right now, because again, the company's been through a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. How has the share structure evolved? Where is it now? So did you call up legacy shareholders? Have you been able to replace some of those, or yeah, what's the unspoken structure looking like right now?
So the shareholders that started with the company in 2018 as a diamond exploration company, I think probably largely have moved on. And we, a lot of that change happened in 2020, 2021 when we stopped looking for diamonds in Australia and started pivoting to gold and base metals. And we picked up a lot of new shareholders in 2021 with the acquisition of Miminiska and Keezhik. And of course, we ran into some difficulty with First Nations pretty quickly out of the gate on that. And over the course of the intervening 3 years, we've lost some of those shareholders that came in, particularly for the gold assets that came in with Miminiska and Keezhik that we acquired from Landor. But we've also brought some new investors in. So we are, I would say, largely owned by high net worth investors. The retail number, I think it's around 30, about a third of the company. Landor no longer owns any shares. We, about a little over a week ago, we crossed Landor's shares to new investors. So, they had just under 10%. They actually had over 10%. At one point, they had almost 15% of the company. And we have been replacing those shares because Landor did not want to be a shareholder. They're an exploration company like Storm. And they viewed that as if they could turn it into cash, that was better for them. So we were able to do that, be able to find new shareholders who wanted to own Storm at these levels and cross most of that stock out between 22 and 24 cents.
That was one of my questions. It's like, what is Landor going to do with that paper? Because you don't want it to come as an uncontrollable supply into the market. You've been able to place it. And that's all of it? So they're completely out, or are they just under 10%?
No, they are completely out.
Okay, good.
They own no shares. And yeah, they don't own any stake in any of the projects that we have. We don't owe them any money. They do have a 2% NSR on Keezhik that we can buy back 1% for $1 million at any time. Yeah. So that's the only role that Landor has in Storm at this stage.
Who did you place those shares with? And if you're not able to talk to me about specific names, if there are any large names there, how many people did you place with? Is it got a long-term shareholder? Is it something strategic, or is it just investors essentially?
I would say these were so a combination of new investors came in, some existing investors who wanted to increase their position, some investors that are very industry savvy, know a lot about. So, I would consider them to be strategic because, you know, we sort of been discussing, Storm has been quiet for a long time, so people don't know. People have forgotten about the story, and so I need to get in. I need to have people open doors for me to introduce the story. So having strategic investors who understand the business, who are in the business, who can also say, "Hey, look, I've just invested in this company. Have a look at it," and then maybe make an introduction goes a long way towards sort of increasing the market's awareness of what we're doing.
Yeah.
So those are important strategic investors from my perspective, as opposed to a lot of people when they say a strategic investor, they're thinking like a producer, right? Because they're helping you strategically on the technical side. But there's also the capital market strategy and having investors that are capital market savvy and can help propel your company are important to have.
Yeah. Well, different stages require different strategic support of companies. So I'm glad you're explaining it that way. I would actually think it's too early for you to have a major in there. Sometimes they would have too much of an upper hand, and maybe you don't even get a good deal at this stage.
Yeah, we're exactly. I think it's still early for most of the producers. We're early stage. That they come a little bit later, and by introducing them at a super early stage, then you got to be careful. You don't want to compromise your takeout premium. If you find something that's really interesting and you've got a major who owns 20% of your company, it becomes challenging to get another producer to take a run at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, exactly. To the point, before I forget this, Bruce, to the point of royalties, do you or any of the other insiders personally own a royalty in any of the projects you have?
No.
Okay. What is the royalty situation? So let me kind of walk me through it. Gold standard, Keezhik, Attwood, you said Keezhik 2%, you can buy back 1%. Is that everything? And
Correct.
what's the situation for the rest of it?
So gold standard has a 1.5% royalty. Then we can buy half of that back, so 7.75% for $1 million, I believe it is. I'd have to go and check that to be certain. I think it's $1 million. So we can buy back down to 0.75% on gold standard. Attwood has no royalty. We stake that ground ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Good. Again, clear and easy to understand. I think this about does it for the smell test. I want to move on and get back to talking specific here and exactly what you're doing. Let's start with the why, specifically the why on Miminisca. Like why sell your most advanced asset? What's the thinking here?
Well, okay, so it's pretty simple to explain. We're at the time when we started to discuss that deal, there were two options, right? We could have moved the project forward ourselves, raised the money and gone drilling, or we could do what we did, which was to vend the project. To move the project forward really required, $2.5 to $3 million I would have had to raise. I mean, you need some corporate money to do the marketing, but you also need the exploration dollars to do a 3,000 meter drill program down there. And 3,000 meters is kind of the minimum program you would want to do. So, 3 to 5,000 meters, and you're looking at, $3 million plus. Well, we were a $4 million market cap company at the time. So the dilution would have been severe. You layer on top of that we still in March of this year had a payment coming up to Landor of $1.3 million, right? So, you were looking at more dilution at that stage, having to pay that bill. So you were relying on your ability to raise a lot of money, very dilutive money, high cost of capital, and relying on the success of your first drill program to be able to propel the stock price forward enough that you're not going to, really more dilution, paying that $1.3 million bill that's going to be due to lender. So the risk to the shareholder was quite high going that route. Doesn't mean that we couldn't have done. I'm very confident that you could drill some very spectacular holes, and that the Canadian Goldfields will drill spectacular holes at Miminisca. But it's still a risky business, right? There's no guarantee. And there's also no guarantee, and as I'm sure you've seen in the market, that we could have come up with really good holes and not have excited the market just because the market wasn't very good. So all it does is create a liquidity event. And then again, you're into a very dilutive situation of moving it forward because your next stage is more drilling. So if you can't get out of that rut of, $3 or $4 million market cap and you're continuously diluting, you're kind of in a death spiral. You got to be really careful with that much dilution when you're such a small market cap. Mm-hmm. You come in with Canadian Goldfields, and these guys come in with a fresh company. They come up with a bid that's larger than the market cap of the company. Plus, we are getting a meaningful position in shares of that company, so we still get exposure to Miminisca. And Miminisca's, if you want to use the horse jockey analogy, Miminisca's a great horse, but CGM, the Canadian Goldfields, those are great jockeys. These are the same guys that started K92 and King Copper. They've got great access to capital. They have a excellent technical team. And so it just made a lot of sense, where I'm taking out all the risk. I get the Landor bill paid. We now own Keezhik 100% because if I back up, that Miminisca and Keezhik came together as a package from Landor. And so that $1.3 million bill was to acquire both of them. By selling Miminisca, I pay that bill off. I now own Keezhik 100%. And I've got capital in the company, non-dilutive capital, to go and explore the other projects that I have, as well as maintaining the upside or exposure to the upside of Miminisca. So, from my perspective, it made a lot of sense to do that. It basically resets the company in finances. It leaves us, with 100% ownership in 3 great projects and exposure to Miminisca. It made sense from a business perspective. Look, don't get me wrong. It was hard to give up Miminisca. I really like that project. I think that there's a great opportunity there. But when you look at the business case, it just made more sense to sell it than it did to try and explore it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was an easy answer. I feel like you've been asked that one before. Probably a couple hundred times in the last couple of months.
Many times. Because there are people who were invested in Storm because they wanted to see us explore Miminisca, and they were disappointed that the company sold the project. And you can't please all of the shareholders. The vast majority of shareholders that I spoke with liked the deal and supported the deal.
Well, but what's happening now? So the assets that you're retaining now, and hopefully we'll talk about each one of them more in depth here in a couple of minutes, but are they a bit of a second best then in that case? I mean, would you still work these assets if let's say, for example, magically you had money and you could keep Miminisca at the same time? Would you still work these assets, or are you now just going to work them because there's nothing else to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Each one of these projects we acquired because we believe in them. So all of the projects would have gotten work. You had to put your focus, again, when you're a small market cap, you have to be careful how much money you spend and where your focus is going to be. So they might not have had as much work as they'll get now had we still been working Miminisca. But every one of these projects, they're there for a reason.
Mm-hmm. And again, we will talk about them. Might as well talk about them right now, actually, and we can kick it off by talking about Gold Standard, it being the flagship or like the most advanced one. It'd be good to start with that one. How did it even end up in your hand? Like, how does a project that you believe is good, how does that end up in the hands of a small Explorico if it's as good as you believe it is? What's the history there? Why hasn't anybody worked it since the 70s?
So the Gold Standard is an interesting story. We got interested because there were some prospectors that we met in Thunder Bay that had acquired the gold showings. And there are 3 of them in the property, and they're in the southeast of the property. And they're old gold mines which were mined between 1901 and 1903. High grade, reported at 55 grams per ton. Sank shafts down maybe 25 meters and drifted another 30, and then lose the vein. What interested me was that nobody had done any sort of systematic exploration. There'd been no drilling. There'd been very little follow-up on those mines in the 100 years or 120 years that had passed sense. So, I thought, okay, it was an inexpensive option to acquire those few claims that the prospectors had. So we did that. And then, looking at the geology and just looking at the area as you do as an explorer, I saw that there were 4 holes that had been drilled by Inco in between 1969 and 1970. And they were up about 4 kilometers away from the gold showings. But I thought, for the extra few $1,000s, let's just increase the property to incorporate those drill holes. Inco was there for a reason, so why were they there? So, when you looked at the assessment reports, it said the assessment reports noted that out of the 4 holes, 3 had encountered copper and zinc sulfides. And in the mineral data, the showing database in the Ontario government there's a zinc and copper showing up there. So that was the reason for expanding it up to there. It was really just, hey, for a few $1,000s, let's go capture that. You never know what might be up there. Mm-hmm. Inco, big company, they were there for a reason. So fast forward, we went down, we did some exploration around the gold mines. We picked up some grab samples to confirm that, the high grade gold was there. That's where we got the 166 gram per ton grab sample. And we thought, okay, that's located along a really big shear zone, which is it's a regional shear. So big break in the crust. And we thought, okay, so let's fly that with airborne magnetics and electromagnetics. So you're measuring the magnetics of the rocks as well as how conductive they are to see if we can understand what's going on with that shear structure. And maybe we can kind of figure out what's going on with the gold. And we flew it with a survey called VTEM. What came out of that was this massive EM anomaly that lines up with those 4 drill holes. So Inco clearly knew about this big EM anomaly. That's why they positioned their holes there. But they were holes the drill they used is called a Winky drill. So that drills a core that's about the size of your thumb. It's very small. And the deepest hole was about 80 feet, so 25 meters. And in 3 of the holes, as you'd said, they noted that there were zinc and copper sulfides, but they didn't send the rocks in for assay. What you've got in the assessment report is a hand-drawn picture of where the drill hole is based on, from a lake, and then notes from the geologist about the core, but they didn't send it in for assays. There's no assay results. So you look at this big EM anomaly. So electromagnetic anomaly just means you've got something that's very conductive. Generally, we would associate that with sulfides. Not always it's sulfides, but in this instance, you can be pretty confident it's going to be sulfides because you have those copper and zinc sulfides from the 1970s in the drill holes. That anomaly can be anywhere from sort of 50 to 70 meters wide, best estimate, and it's 5 kilometers long. Mm-hmm. So, did they test it in the right place? Were the drill holes located accurately? We can't locate them. They're tiny little things that from 1970, so they're gone, right? But it's worth testing that. Now, that EM anomaly is located right on forestry roads. So to go in there, do a little bit of groundwork to just better understand the characteristics of that big 5 kilometer EM anomaly and understand where you want to be along that anomaly for drilling is, so you do a little bit of groundwork to kind of figure out where you want to be in that 5 kilometers. And then, let's come in with 1,000 or 1,500 meters, maybe 2,000 meters worth of drilling. Will be very inexpensive because you can basically drive to the whole anomaly and test that. It's higher risk than, for instance, Keezhik. Keezhik has a lot of historical drilling from the 1980s. So this doesn't. It has, these small holes from the 1970s. So I would view it as a little bit higher risk. But if that is, we believe that's going to be a VMS, so volcanogenic massive sulfide type of thing. So if it has decent copper and zinc numbers, that's a company maker right there. And it could test, all in maybe $500,000 to go and do a little bit of groundwork and test it with some drilling. Should be very inexpensive in terms of a sort of, if you want, drill and kill type of scenario.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk about the specifics and what you're hoping to get there in the first place. When you talk about that story, though, about what Inco did, first of all, pretty cool to hear about how geologists worked on it by hand. Probably as a geologist for you, that's even cooler to see all of that. But why did they walk away? I mean, it's not, is it expensive to hold? Was it like, what was why did they walk away?
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe they didn't see the thicknesses they wanted to see. Maybe prices weren't right. Maybe they found something that was more important. Again, it obviously wasn't a big campaign because it's a winky drill. I mean, you can't basically, you can almost walk the thing in. It's really light, small, lightweight drill. So, it wasn't a big campaign, maybe just a little, reconnaissance drilling, ran into some sulfides, didn't really think it was that interesting. I don't know the answer to that question. It was a long time ago, and I don't know anybody that worked on it. And it certainly isn't explained in the notes in the assessment reports, only what's there. For me, looking at and again, maybe they didn't have a sophisticated, well, certainly they didn't have a sophisticated EM system, airborne EM system as we did. So maybe we have better handle on what the anomaly looks like and where it is. So, I only look at it as evidence that there's a reason to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm always interested in kind of figuring out the history of the project and who has anything to say about it. This one again worked back in the 70s, so I would hope anybody who's ever touched it is happily retired at this point. But yeah, fast forward to now, what are you going to be looking for here? It's as far as I understand, the deposit model is a VMS. Why do you
Correct.
think it makes sense for there to be a VMS in this type of setting?
Well, they're not unknown in this part of the world. I mean, there are VMS deposits around in this archaeology. Excuse me. That in terms of I don't know that definitively, right, Antonio? That's what we think. When you look at the copper and zinc sulfides, you look at the size of that anomaly. It's most likely VMS to us, but we could be wrong. You need the truth machine to be certain of that. But that certainly seems like a logical explanation given the mineralization that we see and the characteristics of the EM anomaly. So what are we looking to do? Well, okay, where do we want to be? It's 5 kilometers long. Where do we want to be along that anomaly? Is there a place where it appears to be better? And to get that answer, you want to do two things. Maybe a little bit of ground geophysics just to make sure you've got better resolution on what that EM anomaly looks like on the ground. Again, this is airborne. But probably more important than that is getting out with doing a little bit of sampling and just a little prospecting. Let's walk that thing. Can we find some outcrop? Right? Are there any rocks to look at? So that's, and that won't take long, a few weeks of work to collect some samples and to do some prospecting and maybe a little bit of ground geophysics just to make sure we have a better understanding of what that geophysical anomaly looks like on the ground. But that should narrow down the whole goal of that is to make sure you understand where along this 5 kilometers, if you're going to put 6 to 10 holes in this thing, where are you going to place them? And 5 kilometers, when you're drilling a hole that's two inches or around, 5 centimeters or something, where are you going to put those in 5 kilometers? It's really important that you do that groundwork ahead of putting the drill in there so that you have the best shot at success.
What's the age of the rocks here? Is it the right age for a VMS in this kind of setting?
Yep, the Archean rocks. You're in a greenstone belt here.
Yeah.
So felsic and mafic.
Could it still end up being an orogenic deposit? That's what I often hear about in greenstone belts.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Well, how are you going to pick these drill targets? And I mean, I know you've released a 2026 plan, but not a drill plan. So we don't know exactly where in the anomaly you're going to go and drill.
No.
When are you going to know? How are you going to know?
Well, so when you get out there, do the groundwork first, right? We need the answers from the groundwork, and that groundwork it thaws out fairly early for northwestern Ontario. There, you could be in. I expect it will be on the ground in late April,
Okay.
and have answers by the end of May, but for where we want to be, and then looking at drilling in June.
Right.
So maybe beginning of Q3, tail end of Q2.
How much money do you want to spend there this year? I mean, drilling and everything together,
$500,000.
including drilling.
I think you can probably do a pretty decent job of drilling for $500,000.
Huh. That would be how much you want to drill.
Oh, not that many. 1,000 meters, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Look, it's not you want to go in with a very lightweight drill. You want to test that. I just want to test this thing along its length. It should be right at surface or not very deep anyway. So let's just test the tenor. I'm not trying to define it in any big way. I'm trying to determine whether or not there's economic mineralization here. And if there is, then we can come back with a more robust drill program and a larger drill. At this stage, this is really, it's very much an exploratory, let's find out what that thing is.
Hmm. So you're not, I mean, it's not going to be deep drilling by any means. How deep do you
No,
think it's going to be?
no, 150 meter holes.
Right. Okay.
Small drill,
Yeah. Yeah.
lightweight,
Fair. Yeah.
small footprint.
Um, do you have committed drillers already? I've been told that finding those in Northern Ontario specifically this year in particular has been very challenging.
We're working with a drill company right now to make sure that everything is ready. And we got so I'm working also with Canadian Goldfields who just bought Miminisca. So there's one we're working together to tie up a drill because between the two companies we can keep a drill busy all
Hmm.
year, I think.
That's also core drilling that you're talking about here. How
Mhm.
come? Why wouldn't RC, for example, work in a greenstone belt?
You want to see the geology. Look, RC is great if you're doing infill drilling, but you need to, at least in my opinion, in first pass, you want to see geology so you understand what rock types you're dealing with and what's the nature of the mineralization you're dealing with. If you're getting RC, it's dust, it's chiclets at best, like tiny little pieces of rock. It's pretty hard to put together the picture.
Mhm.
So yeah, core to start. If you're doing infill, it makes sense to me to use RC, but on the first pass, when you're trying to understand the body that you're exploring, yeah, core is important.
Is it too early to talk and think about what kind of spacing you're thinking? Like, are you going to drill every 50 meters? Do you think you have to step out
Yeah,
bigger
it's
to
way
test
too
more of the?
early to predict. I don't know where on this anomaly where we want to be. You could imagine that we might put, a hole every, I don't know, if you put a hole every 500 meters, you'd be 10 holes would cover 5 kilometers. But I don't see it that I don't think it's going to be like that. I think there are going to be places where it's got greater thickness and you get better soil sample results, and that's where you're going to maybe want to put 2 or 3 holes in a small pace, and then maybe another half a kilometer away you want to drill some more. It's too early to say at this stage what the drill program will look like. So when you're permitting it, what we'll do is we'll basically do a corridor that goes along that EM anomaly and permit that corridor.
Mhm. So the first next news release that we're going to see from here is going to be you essentially showing where the drills,
Well,
where the
yeah, we're
drill holes are
launching the
going to be.
program, any results we get from that program, and then the rationale for why we are going to drill where we drill.
Right. How's permitting? Is all the work that you want to do here permitted? First Nations happy? How's everything going there?
So no, we haven't submitted we're in the process of submitting the application for the drill permit now. I have agreement with the two First Nations in whose traditional territory this project is located. This is the Nakachewinen to the west of the project, and the Nagugun-Seminikani, which is to the east. Both have agreements with both First Nations. My understanding is that the Nakachewinen have been involved in the Detour Lake mine, so they have access to drills as well. So it will involve them in the process of tender when we actually get to the point where we're ready to offer a contract for drilling at gold standard. They'll be involved in providing a tender for that drill.
You don't need a contract to walk the ground and do some of the groundwork, or?
You don't need a permit to go and do, no, as long as you're not doing anything invasive. If you're just collecting soil samples and walking the ground. Look, I inform the communities that we're up there and we're doing that work. And if we can get helpers out of the communities, that's great for us because, you're not mobilizing somebody from far away and you're learning from the local people.
Hmm.
But there's no government permits required to do a bit of soil sampling, prospecting, and ground geophysics, as long as you're not digging anything up.
How accessible is the property from an infrastructure perspective more specifically? I know you just touched upon it earlier, but like if I were to do a site visit, let's say fly
Mhm.
Brussels to Toronto, how would I get from Toronto to the property?
You can fly to Thunder Bay and then either drive or fly to Fort Francis, which is about a maybe 3 hour drive. I've driven it a few times, about a 3 hour drive, I think, to Fort Francis. You can also take a small plane to Fort Francis. Fort Francis isn't a very big town, and maybe 50,000 people live there.
Hmm.
But it's got a couple of hotels and the places to stay if you wanted to stay there, and then you can drive into the property from there. It takes I don't know, a couple hours to get there.
Paved roads though? Two
Paved
Fort
roads to
Francis, yes,
forestry
but
roads, and then forestry roads. You need a four-wheel drive into the forestry. They're all weather forestry roads, but best to have a little bit of clearance. You don't want to
mhm.
go in your Toyota Corolla, you know.
There was a bit of a dig at Europeans right there. It's like you guys with your small cars, don't come here. Which
No, not at
I
all.
went to a
I have
couple of
a European small car. It's not, no, it's about making sure that you don't get high centered on a rutted dirt road.
I did a couple of site visits last year in BC, and I had to make a couple of like when I get out of a car, I had to make like a little hop, and I'm not like super small, whatever, and then still like I'm still surprised by how big the cars are that people actually use within the exploration, like the big Rams or the big Hiluxes and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much what you need for these roads. Um, Good, Bruce. Okay? If it all goes as planned, what would you consider success here? What kind of intercept? Again, because you said it is more exploring with the rig a little bit, 150 meters on average depth. What is the kind of intercept that we're hoping? What am I hoping to see in a news release?
Well, you're hoping to see, tens of meters, 30 meters, 20, 30, 40 meters, maybe even of reasonably high grade numbers of copper, zinc. It's VMS could be just one thing, right? It'll be copper and zinc, maybe a little bit of gold or probably not. But, so something high grade though, 2% copper equivalent, maybe, or better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, like what kind of gold grades would you be hoping to see here?
I don't know that there's going to be any gold. There's certainly no indication that there's gold in this thing.
Hmm.
Right now, all we know is that there were copper and zinc sulfides that were encountered in the drilling in the 1960s and 70s.
Well, there was some
But
grab
I just wouldn't
samples
rule
there.
out having a precious metal component once you explore. If it is VMS, it may have a precious metal component.
Oh, I thought is this what I said at the beginning in my introduction? I thought there was some grab samples there.
Those are down at the where the gold mines are.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's about 4 kilometers from this EM anomaly. So the EM anomaly is up in the northwest, Willie, north of the property, and then down in the southeast corner is where the gold mines are. There's about 4 kilometers separating them, and not much in between, like in terms of mineralization.
What's the topography there? Like maybe from from Fort Francis. Yeah, what's the topography to the anomaly, and then in between on the land package? What does it look like?
It's pretty, there's a lot of flat country there. You'd be surprised at how much farming there is around Fort Francis and Thunder Bay. But part of the world, you're into sort of the rolling tundra of northwestern Ontario, so lakes and outcrops and um,
Yeah.
conifers. It's pretty flat compared to British Columbia, but yeah, it's sort of hummocky, I guess is how I would call it.
That's a
Pretty
nice
flat.
word. We don't use that word often enough. We should use it more. What's the like large lakes, rivers, anything like that on your
Yeah,
property?
oh yeah, it's a land of lakes. There's thousands of lakes. There everything from very small ponds to huge lakes. So yeah, there's water everywhere. There's water everywhere.
Anything that's directly related to any people or peoples?
So there's cabins. There's forestry roads through here, but there's also fishing cabins on some of these lakes, particularly on the one there's the Manitou stretch, which is that's closer to the gold mines. There's cabins from local people having cabins on those lakes, and some of them have been there for a long time. So this is an area that gets used for hunting and fishing. It's not that far from Fort Francis. It's not that far from infrastructure.
Would you have to stop for moose and goose season?
Potentially, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's something that we'll consult with First Nations. April, this part of the world, I'm more familiar with when it is up in the Fort Hope area. It'll probably be a little bit earlier here. So, beginning of April for goose season, I would think, and then maybe September for moose.
You would have been you would have you're going to be done drilling by then though. So you're not going to have started by the first and then you're going to be done by the second. So you're going to be you're not going to have started before goose season and you're probably going to be done by the time it's moose season, right?
Correct. We'll start after goose season and be done before moose season. It
Right.
shouldn't, the drill program I envision it at Gold Standard won't take very long.
Those fishing and hunting cabins that you mentioned, though,
Mhm.
are those going to be a problem, or like, what's the deal with them?
We'll rent them I think people are happy to rent them so that you can stay there. That's
Huh.
been my experience. So you can always find somebody who's happy to rent. Look, you leave a small footprint. We're exploration, right? We're not leaving a big, massive footprint and making, digging a lot of things up. We're pretty light on our feet.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Clear. I think that's it. It is clear what you want to do there. You're gonna have. When do you think the first assays are gonna come out? Is that too early to say? I mean, yeah, labs are gonna be backed
Too
up.
early
It
to
is a bull
say. Sometime in
market,
the
so
summer, I would think. It depends on how busy assay labs are. I expect this is going to be based on the PDAC and how much cash is in the system of exploration. I think the assay labs are going to be very busy. And as you allude to, like drills are becoming increasingly difficult to locate. So, I'm expecting a busy season all around, which will delay results because everybody will have their assay, their rocks in for assay, and they're all priority, right?
hmm.
Everybody says priority.
Yeah. Of course. No assays. I interviewed a couple of the service providers at the PDAC as well. Um, Everybody's complaining about the shortage of people. It's kind of how the industry works in a cyclical industry. When downturn, people leave. So by the time you need them, there's nobody there, and so on and so forth. So that's fair. But no, I
And
mean,
it's been a long downturn, right? I mean, we've
mm,
been a long time really since there's been a sustained good market. There've been blooms of activity where, people you could finance, but it generally very short-lived. And if you weren't in exactly the right position at the right time, the window of opportunity to take advantage of that interest was, really short-lived,
yeah.
really short-lived.
I hope this isn't going to be one. I hope I'm one of those
It
people who are just
feels a
lucky
little
on timing.
different. It feels different this time.
This time's
So
different, eh?
we'll
Um,
we'll well, explorers are optimists always. So we're always believing this is it's the next drill hole.
you got to be an optimist in this business. Actually, I don't know
Absolutely.
too many. I don't know too many pessimistic billionaires in mining, or anywhere really. But then again, I don't really know all that many billionaires in the first place. But it's a no. It's clear. I mean, gold standard. About $500,000 spend on it. You got to get the First Nations to sign off before you can drill it, but you can do some groundwork on it, which is going to start soon. Results are going to come out this summer. In total, it's going to be a small program, about 1,000 meters, 150 meters on average. So shallow, just so you can know where to place it on that big anomaly. That's clear. I understand what you want to do there. What about Keezhik? I believe you said you'd also like to drill a little bit there. What's the situation there?
So, Butterfly Airborne Mag EM there. We have magnetics and we have LiDAR on that property. So it's a big property, 12,500 hectares approximately. It hasn't been drilled since the 80s, but there are 8 different locations where you have drill confirmed high grade gold, fairly narrow widths, but a couple of those are places where I feel like you can grow the footprint with a little bit more groundwork. Again, no work since the 1980s, so you're relying on very old information, and there's a lot more modern techniques that we can bring to bear. So, uh, first of all, so I guess there's a couple of things to do, right? The first thing that we'll do is fly it with the airborne EM, and part of that is to look at the places where we have the gold footprint already, where there's been historical drilling, but also to identify other places on the property where there might be even better targets. I want to put people on the ground. We need people on the ground there over the course of a couple of months during the summer. I'd like them to be armed with the airborne. In fact, I should be signing a contract to fly the airborne survey here this week. That will probably happen in June. And then you've got July and August for boots on the ground to do 2 things: expand the footprints of the gold showings that we know about that were drilled in the 1980s, but also to identify and perhaps choose even better targets for testing. Ideally, testing in the fall, right after moose season, before the snow flies.
Mhm. Besides them being armed with geophysics, they're hopefully armed with bear spray as well.
Yeah,
I think they're going to need it in that part. Not as bad as BC, but still,
yeah, black bears are up there, no question.
yeah. They're more like cats. It's funny. We met a couple. Well, I didn't actually go up there to introduce myself, but we did see a few from afar
Mountain lions?
last year. So black bears.
So cougars
No,
or
black bears.
bobcats?
I thought you said
Oh,
black
black bears.
bears.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. Yes. Okay.
yeah, yeah. No, I wouldn't. I don't want to come close to a cougar. Actually, I think they're scarier. But Bruce, a similar question to Gold Standard here. Only with Keezhik, there is a historic NI 43-101, some decent grades already. Though again, as I mentioned in the intro, they are narrow intercepts. But
Yep.
there is gold there, according to the
No question.
report.
Yep.
So why did nobody advance this one? What's the history there?
Well, so we acquired this property along with Miminiska from Landor. Landor did some sampling in 2011, but never, didn't follow it up. They hadn't done a lot of work on the project. I don't know why nobody worked it between Landor doing a little bit of work in 2011 and the 1980s. Look, it's not easy to get to. I mean, this is a fairly remote part of Ontario. You have to fly in, fly out. So now, despite that, it is within 150 kilometers of the Musselwhite mine. So, it's not like there's no exploration up there, but nobody had been up there since the 1980s. I don't really know why. One of the things that attracted me to the area initially was the fact that nobody'd been up there for so long and so little exploration had been done. But it's clearly a belt of rock that's really well endowed with gold and other precious metals and potentially base metals as well. You just have to, it's not just Keezhik and Miminiska. If you look at, for instance, the ground that S2's recently picked up, Talbot Lake's another one that's held by Argo Gold. There's critical one metals. They're looking at something to the west of Miminiska. This is a belt where, historically, there's a lot of results to indicate, high mineral potential. It's a well-endowed belt with precious and base metals. So, that attracted me. When you see that, if I explain, I like the early stage exploration, but I want to know that I'm in the right place. I want to know that there's going to be mineralization there. I don't want to be in so early that I'm just determining that. The historical work here shows that there's a lot of gold around. Are we, now the job is, can we narrow down where? And that's this. Start that this year with flying it. We have the mag and the LiDAR already, but now we need to put boots on the ground. To look at the targets, see if we can understand them better, but also to identify other targets. It's a large property. I think there's a lot of opportunity for there to be even better targets than those that were drilled in the 1980s.
Any reason why, or do you know in this case why people left Keezhik and didn't develop it any further?
No.
Yeah. It's not like it's.
I know that Landor didn't get into it, didn't really sink its teeth into this project because they got involved. They got busy with a different project elsewhere in Ontario. So Keezhik and Miminiska just set fallow in their property portfolio, and they weren't really doing anything with it. The CEO that was the CEO of Landor at the time when I acquired the properties, he was a very astute geologist. He had good, he had good properties, and just was very reluctant to let them go. But so I had to convince him that if you're not working it, it's more of a liability than it actually is an asset. And it took a long time for him to relinquish them. But that the fact that they were sitting there fallow in an area that had been clearly well endowed, that was what attracted me to the area in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Accessibility. How would a site visit there work? Where do I fly into? How do I get there?
You fly into Fort Hope. Logically, the thing would be to fly into Fort Hope and go by helicopter or float plane from there, depending on what the work that we will do will be helicopter supported. Mm-hmm. These are large properties. There's cabins on all the lakes out there, so these are places that are actively used by the local First Nations, which is the Abamatong. And so there's cabins out there, and our plan is to rent one of those cabins, maybe augment it with a few tents for extra personnel, but then to work by helicopter from there. Daily setouts, and then working with prospecting and sampling.
What kind of paperwork do you have in place with the Abamatong?
I have an exploration agreement with the Abamatong, as I do with all of our projects. All have First Nations agreements,
right?
And that's really important when it comes time to permitting to drill or to do any invasive work. The ministry is very reluctant to give out permits without having some kind of, relationship with the First Nations.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Of course. So when do you think you're going to have, or do you have just full permits? You can go and drill today, essentially. I mean, if the weather
No,
was right.
no, we haven't applied for any permits at Keezhik because we have no idea where we want to drill at Keezhik at this
Okay.
stage. We need to do that groundwork. I need the summer to get out there and do that groundwork. I think by midsummer we'll probably have a pretty good idea where we want to put our applications in for drilling. So that would facilitate drilling in the fall after the moose hunting season's finished.
Can you get the permits that quickly though?
Yeah, the permits, if you have, if the First Nations are on board with you and support what you're doing, then the ministry can turn the permits around very quickly.
Right.
It's when you don't have an agreement with First Nations that the permits don't get turned around quickly.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. But assays at Keezhik will come after
That'll be much later, obviously. Yeah, that'd be late fall,
late fall.
Q4.
Well, it gives you good news flow though. I mean, good like it's not like you're gonna go quiet in September and then say nothing for 6 months.
No, no, and you can work. We can go back to gold standard because it's road accessible. We can go back very early. If we have great success there, then there's no reason that you can't drill early in January, right? Because
Mhm.
it's right on the road.
Yeah. Yeah, fair. And then Attwood, you're gonna have some news there, though. I don't know how many people care about it because it's just, I mean, as I said, you're gonna do an EM, an electromagnetic survey there. When do you think you're gonna do that?
Fly that one as well. We might actually fly it at the same time as Keezhik. There'd be some cost savings if we fly it at the same time. I'm waiting to see how much that would cost and what areas we would want to fly. But yeah, the idea is to put boots on the ground there at the same time that we're doing Keezhik, or shortly after we do Keezhik, maybe put boots on the ground in say September, October, at Attwood. Again, it's not our priority. The priorities this year are going to be gold standard first, and then Keezhik, because that's where we have the most evidence of mineralization, where we think we can make discoveries more quickly. Attwood, though, is a very attractive project. So, it's a bit of a slower burn. We'll do that airborne geophysical survey and then get boots on the ground as we can over the year, to try and develop targets. My idea being, drill it in 2027. And certainly, I think the other goal would be to reduce the size of the property. It's very large, 22,000 hectares. So it's a very large property. We don't need all of it, but I don't know exactly where we want to be on the property until we've done a little bit of flying and some boots on the ground. I really like that property. It's early stage, Antonio, but there are some things about that property that I find very compelling. Just the amount of there's a big shear that goes through there, so a big structure that goes right through the middle of that property. There's clearly a lot of disruption and deformation going on in the rocks there. The thing that attracted us, me in particular, to that project was there was a report written by an Ontario Geological Survey geologist that did mapping in 1981, and he noted that in the iron formation there was arsenopyrite. So in iron formation, if you see arsenopyrite, there's almost always some gold around. It's just really, really closely associated. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that a government geologist who's mapping, these are very technically driven geologists. They're not there for economics. He would not have noted the arsenopyrite in the logs, in his notes, if the amounts weren't sufficient for him to do so. In other words, if it was just a trace amount, he probably wouldn't have made mention of it. So there has to have been enough in the iron formation for it to have made it into his report. So that got me interested in the area, right? I'm already looking because I'm familiar with Miminisca and Keezhik. Now I'm looking down here. I see that report. I see that association with arsenopyrite, and I think, And look around here. There's some big EM anomalies that came out of an airborne survey that was flown by the government in 2000 called Operation Treasure Hunt. And there's an old copper showing from 1960, which, all right, this big EM anomaly south of there, but it looks a lot like the EM anomaly that's over that little copper showing. So, again, from an explorer's perspective, there's a lot of things that look compelling, and for relatively inexpensive, if we staked it ourselves, we could pick that up and explore it over time. No rush to do it. There's no payments to make and no underlying deal. So that one we'll explore a little bit slower, but I aim to maybe pop some holes into it in 2027.
2027 answers one of my questions as well that I had, is like no drill holes this year, but you also said October. So
No, we got our hands full. If we can pull two drill programs off, one at Keezhik and one at Gold Standard this year, I think that's a busy year for the company.
how much money do you want to spend on Keezhik, by the way? I should have asked that too.
So the boots on the ground and the flying is probably going to be around 400 grand. The drill program on top of that would require another million to a million and a half, depending on how much drilling you wanted to do. So call it $1 million minimum. That's money we don't currently have in treasury unless we were to sell some of the shares that we have in Canadian Gold Stand or Canadian Goldfields. I don't know that we would do that. We'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, I have no plans to sell those shares, but and so that would involve raising money to support that drill program sometime in the future. But right now, we have enough money to get the things that I want to do done. And we can decide how we fund further exploration, whether it's through, the sale of shares, or we also have more cash coming in about 8 months from that deal, right? From the $5.8 million sale of Miminisca.
Yeah, walk me through that. So it's how many shares do you get of Canadian Goldfields?
So on the close of the transaction, we got $1.5 million in shares. Those shares were issued at 20 cents a share, so 7.5 million shares of the company.
So
And then the way the deal worked was on signing, there's a $2 million in cash, $1.5 million in shares. And then in 3 months from the date of the close of the agreement, there'll be another $1 million in cash. So that's about 2 months from now. And then in 9 months, on the 9 month anniversary after the deal closed, we'll have $525,000 in cash plus $787,500 in stock, which will be issued at the 30-day VWAP. So
yeah,
30-day volume weighted average price.
I was trying to look at what the price is today or how much money you would get if you were to sell today. But you said you
So I
don't
think
know if
it's
you would.
trading 40 to 45, somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
So
So it's
why
a
would
little over.
you? But why would you sell essentially your own shares? Issuing shares of Storm to raise capital. Why would you sell your own shares instead of selling the shares that you have?
It will all
From
depend
them?
on sort of what's going on with Miminisca and Canadian Goldfields, and whether or not it makes more sense to dilute the company by issuing equity, or whether it makes more sense to sell. It's just a decision I can't make at this stage, right? Until we actually come to that crossroads.
Yeah. But you think that's going to come after you know more about gold standard? Because what I'm thinking, let me tell you where I'm going with this. What I'm thinking here is that if you know more about gold standard, maybe the market gives you a little bit more value for it. So it's less dilutive
Yep,
to raise at that point instead of doing it now.
exactly. Yeah, I'm not looking to raise money right now. There's no need to raise money right now. I think we can probably launch our gold standard drill program before we have to raise money. Now, that said, Antonio, the best time to raise money is when you don't need it. And if the circumstances were right and the right people came to the table, I might, to position some people, might do a small raise. But there's no plans to do one right at this stage. We don't need to right now.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, fair. What about running the company? Where do you think G&A is going to be going forward?
So the G&A historically, we've been able to run it for about 40 between 40 and 50,000 a month.
Yeah.
Over the course of the year, because there are some places, when you've got your audit fees, for instance, they all come in at once. But over the course of the year, between 40 and 50 grand, if I keep it nice and lean, which I continue to do because we are early stage. Marketing is the big bump for us this year. We'll spend probably $20,000 a month on marketing because, again, if nobody's going to buy your shares, if they don't know who you are, and we've been very quiet for the last 3 years, so it's incumbent upon me to get out there, tell the story, make sure people know what we're doing so that we do get fair valuation.
Yeah. Well, how much money do you want to spend on marketing going forward, in telling the story and everything?
Well, so I think marketing, if we average sort of $20,000 a month, so $240,000 a year.
Yeah. Well, so is it going to be, well, what I was thinking about is it going to be kind of like a full blown package? Is it like one set amount aside where like, oh, I do want to spend $250,000 or $1 million or whatever it is, and then you average out over the months, or yeah, how do you think about that?
Well, so there's two components. There's a sort of a kind of things like we're doing here today. But then there's also showing up at, for instance, at trade shows like, or investment conferences like the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference or Swiss Mining Institute or Deutsche Goldmasse or PDAC, Metals Investors Forums. So I haven't committed to any of those shows at this stage, but those are all into consideration. And then, of course, there's the doing interviews like this, which create content for social media. So, there's sort of two investors, and in my world, I look at it as we got two investors. We've got the investors that write checks. And they generally don't spend a lot. They sometimes will support the market, but generally they write checks, right? And then it's really the daily trading volume is retail. And retail, how do you reach retail? Well, a lot of it's through interviews like this that we're doing, and then been populating social media with this information, and continually trying to get that information out to a public. But it's different. How you reach retail is the biggest challenge. It's one of the biggest challenges for us is because we have very little retail following, as far as I can tell. Which is, we don't have a lot of daily trading volume, right? And that's generally because you're missing the retail component.
Well, yeah, as I said, average volume over the last 3 months being about 57,000 units, call it 60 at 20 cents. That's not a lot of money. And so,
No.
how are you going to communicate the story though? Like what would be the angle? Because you did have a few, dare I say, false starts a couple of times. Like you were planning drill programs a couple of years ago, multiple times, and the market, though not often, sometimes does remember things like that. So when you're telling people the story now, what are you telling them to convince them that this time it will be an actual start, and that storm is gonna
well, the difference is a few things. We have capital, we have money in the bank. That's one of the big obstacles is you have to have money in the have to have cash in the bank, and we have the First Nations agreements in place. And that was really the thing that was the obstacle for us in previous years, was getting the First Nations agreements in place took much longer than anticipated. We did try to pivot and do a deal at one point, Antonio, on a project in Newfoundland. It didn't work out. We couldn't get it past the exchange for various reasons, which was quite very disappointing because we put a lot of effort. Both sides of that deal put a lot of effort in trying to make that work, but it didn't come together. So again, that creates a false start. And look, and there's going to be people in the market who remember those things, and they will shy away. Once burnt, twice shy. But and I may or may not be able to change people's minds about that. But there's always new investors who will see the story as a fresh thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the story develops over time, or what kind of the pushback is maybe that you are getting. Because, yeah, I mean, from the things that I'm seeing here is exactly like you're saying, and it is finance now. First Nations thing is the First Nations situation is way better than what it was with Meminisca when we must have been speaking like 2 years ago.
No looming payments, right? That's another one. There were looming payments before, which were always worrisome to people because, how are you going to pay that $1.3 million landlord bill? How dilutive is that going to be? So with all those things out of the way, it's a different story.
Yeah, exactly. What is the pushback that you're getting though when you go and talk to people at conferences? What's kind of what's the most fair criticism that you get of Storm?
So I would say that there was a lot of pushback initially about, there was some pushback about the Miminisca deal because, again, there were investors who had been patiently waiting for us to clear the runway with First Nations and a good market and raise some money and then go drill Miminisca. So there was I think some disappointment with certain investors about that. I think just how long it took, right, Antonio? I mean, in the intervening, from the time that we acquired the projects from Landor to today, 80% of the market cap of the company evaporated. It was just attrition, right? And some of that is because it took so long. Some of that was because we had one very large shareholder just dump a massive amount of shares into the market without even talking to the company, and took us from 13 cents to 4, right? And that was very hard to recover from. So when you put all that, the investors who been in the company for 3 or 4 years have lost most of their money, and so the criticism comes like nothing happened. Too long, too slow. And fair enough. It took a long time to clear the runway so that we can be in the position we're in. And fortunately, the company's all cleaned up. We've got the 3 projects, 100% ownership, and we've got a great market. So yeah, that's, I think the criticism from past investors was, we was an unsuccessful launch with these initial gold projects.
What about yourself? What keeps you up at night looking like this is kind of like looking back with the criticism that you've had, looking forward, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up? Well, look, no CEO worth their salts wants to see investors lose money,
Hmm.
right? And me included, right? So what keeps me up? Because you want to make your company a success, and so if anything keeps me up is how do I make that? How do I make it up to the existing shareholders as best I can? But of course, there's always is the market going to still be good tomorrow when I need it to be? That's another thing a CEO will worry about. But in terms of look, I haven't felt this optimistic and this good about the company in a long time. We're in a great place. We have, like I said, we've got ownership of 3, I think, very compelling projects, a very low share count, money in the treasury, and we've got supportive shareholders. I mean, there are shareholders, past shareholders who probably don't want to play anymore, but I think we've got a great story, and there are shareholders that do, and are very supportive of what we're doing. So I'm excited about what's coming towards us this year. I think we're going to have a great year.
Hmm. And I'll be along for the ride and following along with you, doing updates, hopefully often as you have results. What's your most fair criticism of me, Bruce? What did you come here hoping to talk about that I've failed to bring up?
I think we covered off a lot of ground. I don't think I wouldn't say that there's really any criticism. It's been a pretty wide-ranging conversation. I think you've asked all the critical questions. I hope I answered them to the satisfaction of your listeners. Certainly, I'm available. I answer my own phone. So if people want to call and ask me more questions, I'm here to talk about it.
Hmm. Well, I wish my wife was as understanding and as non-critical as you are of me. But no, it's been a pleasure. For people listening, if I am forgetting something, which I'm sure I am, let me know, because Bruce and I are going to have multiple conversations over the next 12 months, and we're going to cover those conversations or those questions in a future conversation. But yeah, Bruce, I'm going to let you be and go and walk the dog, I suppose, right now. What are you going to do after this call?
I have more marketing calls to make.
Well, good for you. Hard at work, but thank you so much for stopping by today, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know, and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias, and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company-specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should, under no circumstances, be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. So unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you find the company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."